excited to be here back at the MDZ. It's just this warm, fine, good feeling about being here. And we're talking about the first session. I was mentioning that when I was at NSF and funding natural history museums, that this was always a really welcoming, exciting place to be at compared to some of the other museums I had to do a site visit at. And Jim Patton said, as so often is the case, I think Jim Patton came up with the real important explanation. And that is that at this museum, the polemical wars that we saw at some other institution never took place, at least in my mind. People were always friends here. First time I gave a talk at the American Museum of Natural History. You could tell from where somebody sat in the room which end of the spectrum they were going to attack you. I never felt that way. The other thing that really was extremely important to me and other students like Dave and Marvel were their help to all of us when we reached that inevitable point in your graduate career, when you face a crisis of confidence. And I think possibly, well, Dave and Marvel were just extremely helping us over those, helping us see that we trusted us to complete our PhD. So it's really great. I'd like to talk today a little bit about the differences in my career, my professional budgeting, and that of any of the rest of you in this room. I started out in academia thinking that's where I was going to be. I had tenure, I was funded, expected to be there forever. When one day, out of the blue, I got a letter from the National Science Foundation saying, how would you like to come be a rotator for a year? Somebody who actually gives out money to do research. I was in between grants at that time. My research program was having a few hiccups. It sounded like a good idea. Go away for a year, think about what might happen and what I might do in the future. Fully intended to go back to Michigan State University, but I found that I liked doing research vicariously as much as doing it in the flesh. NSF was an exciting place to be. To look across all of biology, get a feel for what was going on in different areas, and begin to try to help to develop activities that would be relevant to your group, your particular area of interest. And one of the things that quickly began to appear to me was that in the molecular lab, there were lots of big infrastructure databases and facilities that really engaged and helped molecular biology. Aside from natural history collection, which by the time I was at NSF in the mid-80s were beginning to get computerized, aside from the natural history collections and the databases that were developing, there wasn't much of that at other levels of biodiversity above the molecular level. So I got excited about how we might be able to help improve the infrastructure, especially at the specimen and species level. For me, the catalytic statement came from Peter Raven from the University of California at a workshop in 1992. And Raven noted that we were getting all these collections computerized, that we could go get information, but there was no one place where you could go and search all the collections. And that was a spark that then led me and others to begin to think about biodiversity. That was in 1992, and interestingly enough, as far as we can tell, the term biodiversity was invented in 1992 by a Canadian, John Whiting. He actually started biodiversity informatics as a way to help business interface with the Convention on Biological Diversity, and getting going around the same time. And he saw it as the merging of geographic information systems, global positioning systems, database management, environmental economics, and user intelligence. It's a really interesting discussion of what Walter Berenson calls the term biodiversity informatics at this website at the Berlin Mechanical Program. So this development of biodiversity informatics was coming along at exactly the time when we were trying to figure out how to use it. I've been looking around and trying to figure out, is there a standard definition of biodiversity? There is not. Just like other important words like species and gene, there is no standard definition. Interestingly enough, I was surprised to see that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has, in law, a definition of biodiversity. Pretty weird. Maybe we should try to get one here in California. So, taking these biodiversity informatics tools, taking the suggestion made by Peter Raymond, a bunch of us began to work to try to develop this single portal to collections and observations to point data. And the implementation of this actually turned out to be the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which got started in 2001. 9-year gestation period, political bullshit period to try to get it going. Now, GBIF has about 145 million records from natural history collections and observation databases. About 95 million of those are geo-referenced, and this map shows plotted all of those points. About 660,000 of those records come from this particular museum. And you can see that GBIF has a lot of data for North America, pretty good for Europe. Some parts of the North Atlantic are doing pretty well, some parts of Australia. What I found really fascinating is you can see individual voyages of ships through particular latitudes or longitudes across the ocean. Now, you can also drill down at GBIF to individual specimens. Here's a specimen of what's now called the Brachiocephalia that I was involved with, as Dave in a collecting trip in Dead. And you can plot individual species. Here's a really interesting one. Notophthalmus viridescens, the eastern newt. Of course, this is a North American species. You can see one of the problems with GBIF here. What is potentially a problem? There appears to be a specimen of Notophthalmus viridescens over here in Uzbekistan. When you look at where this specimen comes from, it's from Cornell University Museum. So I suggest to Harry, either they've got a really interesting range extender here, really decent, or more likely they ought to check out the georeferencing. It looks like to be like, most likely they forgot to put the minus but this also, I think, raises a point that's really important. Some people say, don't put up any data until you are certain that all is checked and are perfect. You know, the data are ever perfect. If we followed that kind of route, we'd never have any information to get it. Instead, do what we did. Digitize everything, put it up on the web, and let the world help you find problems. Like I hope you solve the Eastern Newt. Now, two of the things that GBIF wanted to do, but never had any money to be able to do. GBIF is an intergovernmental organization, which has lots of good things about it. It means the governments actually put money into it. The governments are likely to continue to have money, and therefore the long-range prognosis for GBIF might be good. But it also means you're subject to the whims of those governments with respect to what they want to do. And two of the things that those governments never wanted to do, have never wanted to do for GBIF, is something GBIF called a species bank. This was intended to be a big catalog of information of all kinds about the world species and a digital library of biodiversity data. And this is actually what the Encyclopedia of Life is now included. As was mentioned by Jim Hankin this morning, the Encyclopedia of Life, or at least the current instantiation of it, was started, was catalyzed by the message, the paper by Ethel Wilson about an Encyclopedia of Life, was also catalyzed by a letter that Wilson wrote to the MacArthur Foundation in 2005. That letter said, you guys are looking for big things to do. One of the biggest things you could do would be to fund an Encyclopedia of Life. One page. That letter sparked interest in the MacArthur Foundation. It eventually came forward with some funding, and so we now are putting together the Encyclopedia of Life. I left NSF in May of 2007. In detail by NSF to Copenhagen for 5 years to run the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. I came back in May of last year, retired, and started working to help make the Encyclopedia of Life happen. So what is it? It's an online resource for plants, animals, and microorganisms. The intent is to have a web page for each one of the validly described species. Now, all of you in this room know, but it's a secret to much of the rest of the world, we don't even know how many validated species there are. The guesstimate is 1.8 million, and so we say we're going to make 1.8 million websites. Plus, all the millions of other species, as they're described, are intended to incorporate that information into the Encyclopedia of Life. All in a common format, so that once you know how to run through one of the web pages, you'll be able to navigate them all. Customizable by the user. If you don't care about reproductive data, you don't have to see reproductive data. Freely available, accessible from a common portal, and of course, it'll never be completed because we're always finding new information about organisms. And so the Encyclopedia of Life is going to have to exist forever in order to incorporate that information. Why now? There's a strong interest in species information in the academic world, in the policymaker world, in the general public world. People want accurate species information. Also, just recently, the tools, the information technology tools have become available to allow us to develop an Encyclopedia of Life without having to sit down and a word processor to start with word 1. Rather, we can use mashup, our aggregation technology, to bring together various kinds of resources to at least give draft images that experts can then use in order to develop the full species page. And those experts can use wiki-based kinds of tools. I didn't say Wikipedia. I said wiki-based kinds of tools to authenticate those pages and pull the information in. That could then be presented to the world as having been authenticated, having been endorsed by the scientific community. EOL appeals to donors. We have $25 million for the first 5 years of the project, $20 million from the Sloan Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, $5 million from the Sloan Foundation, and the institutions involved in the Encyclopedia of Life have each agreed to try to raise $5 million apiece over the next 5 years or so. So we could have $50 million to bring to bear on this process. And capable institutions are interested in making it happen. Here are the institutions that are currently involved in the Encyclopedia of Life: the Smithsonian, Field Museum of Natural History, Harvard, Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Missouri Botanical Garden. The Atlas of Living Australia is about to join, and we have a consortium, the Biodiversity Heritage Library Consortium, that I'll come back to in a minute. But equally important, things like amphibia things like fish days, things like the planetary biodiversity inventory about the family Solanaceae have been willing to provide information through the encyclopedia, expose that information to the world at large, and individual scientists who are indeed the folks who have to be the curators of that information and who going to have authenticated data research. And of course, Berkeley has been a real leader here with its biodiversity informatics project, with things like MANIS and BERTNet and Hornets and the proposed BERTNet with Berkeley Mapper. These kinds of tools are extremely important both at the specimen level and at the species level. So how are we pulling this information together? Well, we're proposing a collaboration between the scientific community and the general public. The scientific community assembles the information through projects like AmphibiaWeb or through individuals, authenticates the information. We're also proposing, in addition to the authenticated area, to have an unauthenticated area that anyone can submit information to. You have a picture, you have an observation, you have a poem, you have whatever you'd like to submit about a particular species, you can put it here. And the best of that information can be pulled over into the authenticated site. This differentiates EOL from something like Wikipedia because of the authenticated nature. But you can still look at the unauthenticated stuff if you want. So we just opened our first version of the EOL portal a couple weeks ago, 26th of February. As Jim Hankin noted, we had 19.5 million hits the first day. Now, that wasn't just people who were interested in critics. It was also the fact that we got Slashdot. There's this nerd group that calls themselves Slashdot, techie group. Whenever a big new project comes on board, they try to hit it with everything they possibly can and find out where the weak points are. And they found our weak points. First few days we had a lot of trouble with the site. It's now pretty stable. So what's there? What's available right now? We have 25 exemplar species pages. These were specially built pages from folks within our cornerstone institution who had a real love for a particular organism. We have 35,000 partially filled species pages with information coming from fish base, from AmphibiaWeb, from Solanaceae source, etc. We have 1 million placeholder pages with the names based on the catalog of life partnership. These exist, in most cases, a name, in some cases, a range map, I should say, a dot map for specimens that we know about them, and they also come with an invitation to the world that when Encyclopedia of Life is ready, that the world help us complete these pages. So here are a couple examples of some of the pages. This is an interesting species of deep-sea damselfish that was only described in January of this year. Rich file from the PhD. And Rich is working to develop tools that will allow people to give information about the species they're working on as they're working them up. To give the sequence information to GenBank, to give barcode information to the fold database, to give name information to ZocoBank, to give species data information to the OL, range information to GBIT. That tool will be made available to all of you for you to use in your own talks about activities. Each page has on it a little slider. When the slider's more toward the right, then you get the scientific name as the top entry on each page, and the common name down below it. And over here, for the classification, you also get scientific names within the classification. Below the picture is a table of contents, a series of chapters about this particular organism. Here's another one of these exemplar pages that Jonathan Losas and colleagues put together. Here we've moved the slider over toward the left. You can't see it, it's off the bottom of the page. We get the common name as a major entry, and we get common names over here in the classification. This is to show you some of the entries in the table of contents about this particular organism. This is the kind of standard we hope to be moving toward for as many species as possible. Of course, there are lots of species that have only been described once and we know very little about them. So we'll never be able to get to this level with them, but for many species we should be able to do this kind of level of information. Now, I mentioned the Biodiversity Heritage Library. This is an interesting part of the Encyclopedia of Life. It consists of 10 of the world's largest natural history libraries who are planning to digitize all, I say all, of their biodiversity literature. Not just digitize it, but also OCR it, so that you can search for any term, any scientific name, for example, within that information, and apply what they're calling taxonomic intelligence. That is information about synonymy, so that it will be able, even if it's an old name of a particular organism, to find out about it. And here are some of the examples of material that's already been digitized by the Biodiversity Heritage Library. They're starting with all the out-of-copyright stuff, pre-1923, but also making connections to publishers, including those from scientific societies to try to get in copyright material also served. Here is a page from AmphibiWeb. This shows you some of the problems we're going through. No picture. Now, of course, there are lots of pictures of the eastern Europe. We don't have a picture yet because we've been unable, so far, to work with CalPhotos to get agreement to access that. One point I wanted to make here is that every bit of information, whether it's text, whether it's a photo, has information about where it came from and how you can reuse it. And this page, you'll note, was written by one of your actors here from UC. So, why have we released our portal now? It's still in relatively rough shape. We released it because we want your feedback. We want feedback from people about what we can improve, what you'd like to see done better. We've done a survey. We'd like your feedback about it. I'll quickly cover the other three major parts of the Encyclopedia of Life. One which may be especially of interest to academics here is the biodiversity synthesis center led by the field engineers. This is an attempt to develop a biodiversity analog for the National Center for Ecological Analysis. And synthesis is for the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center. They are taking proposals for working groups focused on biodiversity kinds of questions, either focused on tools or synthetic material or areas where we don't know much about particular groups of classes. So go to their website, look for the request for proposals to get if you're interested. We have an education and outreach group that's just getting going. We'll focus on citizen science, on informal education and informal education, and we have this Biodiversity Heritage Library component here, the 10 libraries that belong to the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And unlike Google Books, For example, the digitizing of this literature is human mediated. At least somebody stands there all day and turns the pages. Imagine doing that, but apparently they stick on their iPods and zone out. One final thing, moving beyond even encyclopedia of life, is the integration of biodiversity informatics resources around the world. We're working to put together a meeting which will happen in London next year in June, calling it eBiosphere 09, and the intent is to develop an integrated, interoperable resource for biodiversity. So you'll be able to go to the kinds of stuff that we saw that Catherine showed us, or that we saw earlier from Erica, and link together this kind of information using these tools. In closing, we'll come back to the reason we're all here today. Of course, it is the natural history collections, the specimens in those collections, and the ancillary data, such as field notes, frozen tissues, etc., that give us the documentation in space and time about the world's biodiversity. And hence, that's the essential resource that this museum and others use to. Thank you very much.
Time for question while we switch up.